communication, right? My disclaimer is I'm not an engineer, one. I'm a designer. I'm not a speaker usually. I am a designer. But communication is as important as the gentleman before me said. And I title this talk because I'm quite informal. What is your story? You never know who you're going to meet, who's listening, and you got to be ready. Like Joaquin said, both gentlemen said great stories. And within that scope of things, I try to organize some story that would hopefully relate to you guys in your language as an engineer. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't for engineers. If I weren't engineers, and there's a symbiotic relationship in our fields. I'm also an industrial designer. I currently work, but you'll find all that out. So start with my story because that's, but I'm going to tell you instead of projects, I'm going to use the word of different stories behind each of these situations. So this is more like my story in terms of years from high school all the way. What the heck was I doing? You know, really interested. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I was born and raised there. Scouting was very big in my life. I was always very identified with the idea that I am an American, but not from the U.S. From Alaska to Patagonia, I am an American designer. I spent some time in Europe. I am Europeanly trained, but I became even more American because of that. Very fascinated about our music, our history, our language. In terms of education, I was born, well, not quite literally, but my mom was a professor at the University of Puerto Rico, and I was born in the faculty residence of the University of Puerto Rico. Both of my parents, they're from the island, and we didn't grow up wealthy, but everybody around me was a PhD in history or in social justice or in sociology, and the discourse and the types of conversation that occurred were very keen. I have never been, ironically, very academic, but yet that reflected in my grades, GPAs. I've never been asked for my grades, so, but yet, so I talk about the Central High, which is a 1920 structure in that's a magnet art school in Puerto Rico, which I begged my mother to send me to. So Philmont, which is from scouting, is a Boy Scout reservation in New Mexico. It became a mountain guide. It's I consider it part of my education. You'll see it through the work, hopefully. The Fine Art School at University of Texas. When I was 16, my parents just dropped everything. We sold everything. My father decided to go back to school, and we lived off of that money. And I decided to go to the University of Texas because I couldn't afford anywhere else. My father said, I eventually will make money because we moved to the US, and you can go to grad school wherever you want. I ended up staying at UT, but that's what this one is. The School of Architecture, Battle Hall, amazing building. And below it is while in undergrad, I decided I wanted to design camping gear. That's why I wanted to, so it's very pragmatic, very reasonable why I want to design camping gear. I was fascinated with materials. I'm fascinated with vanguard. I'm fascinated with the idea of independence, not relying on anybody, being in the middle of nowhere. I had all those experiences in the woods. I learned everything I know about siting a building, from how to place a tent and not get wet in the middle of the night, or orienting yourself from the stars and all that. So that's very, very, very keen. So I dropped everything in my third year because at UT, the program was designed, they call it design, but now it's called design thinking. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's very much about the methodology rather than the product. It's about the course of action or the projection of how you arrive to a solution. It's through stories, it's through narratives and all that kind of. So that's very important. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining that to engineers when I'm trying to work on a project. So my third year I dropped out and because I wanted to design camping gear, and I followed a girl to Europe. That never happened or whatever, but traveled all over Europe, but I ended up in Milan, Italy, following this notion of radical design and history. I'm very interested in history. That's where this is. So throughout the years, it's been a pilgrimage every 2 years to go to the furniture show. Not because I wanted to design furniture, but that's how furniture chose me in a way. That's what. Then I decided to go to architecture school after my undergrad, even though I hadn't I finished my master's in industrial design while in Italy. I had an opportunity to do that. It's a long story, but this is a short talk, right? So each of these are part of that. When I came back from Italy, finished my undergrad in design, and then decided to go into architecture school at 20. So I was very young. I didn't want to go back to work. My father was already working. It's like, okay, you can go wherever you want. Well, I don't really want to go to Harvard or anything. I'll just stay in Austin because Austin is way cool. And while in architecture school, it's a great architecture school. Goes to your talk about being ready. Goes to the Boy Scout thing. But I was never the best student. All my buildings at first looked like furniture because of my experience. But I ended up winning a scholarship because I was ready to go to Paris, and that's what that building on the far right is. If you're not civil engineers here, or that's the Pompidou Center in downtown Paris. It looks like nothing in Paris, but that's done by a collaboration between a really amazing engineer, Peter Rice, who was also the civil engineer behind the Sydney Opera, and Renzo Piano, the architect whom I work with in Paris. Also, I had the opportunity to work with architects at the UNAM in Mexico City with projects, so I got to very familiar. So I'm American, like I said, Latin American. Practice is very important. Every summer I had an internship, whether it was in industrial design with Dell or firms that did with Dell. As a kid, when I told my mother I wanted to design camping gear, she said, "Oh, there's nothing like that, mijo." In Puerto Rico, there's no industrial design, there's graphic design. So I was in a place with a painter. So for a while, I was mixing paints, sweeping the floors. But it's a really good experience. Paris experience on the far right, at top with the LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art. So I did all the detailing for those two buildings. And London for the St. Giles. Nobody in architecture school would ever admit they want to make money. But most architects, it's a very ingrained profession. You are a starving artist. So I never wanted to be a starving artist. But there was one gentleman who came who said, "I'm going to be interviewing interns for developers for Marriott resorts." Nobody, they dared me, we want to bet. So I ended up going to Orlando, Florida to enter for Marriott vacation clubs and work for the man, so to speak. And that was their minority quota. Unfortunately, that's how it was introduced a few times. But stories, right? How do you work all these issues, all these stories, how do you combine them together? I always show this project, which I'm still working on. It's been 14, 15 years. Stories don't necessarily end until you say it, and art is knowing when to stop. I haven't known how to stop. Tertulia, like I said in my childhood, everybody was always at my house. We're always having discourse. We're always talking about everything ongoing. I wanted to be free, so my backpack had rods, which is the shape of your back. That's curved. The project was to design a communicator. Back then, believe it or not, I was a lot shyer, and I would not talk to anybody unless I was sitting down, face to face. So I designed a Tertulia kit. So not a chair. It had nothing to do with the chair. But over the years, it's developed into teaching myself how to bend wood, how to use wood, metal, aluminum, stacking, folding, to the point where when doing research several years later, I realized that there's only two types of folding chairs, the A and the X frame. This one doesn't fold in either of them. You create new paradigms. When you start combining, life is in stereo. You need to listen to all of it at once. It's a juggling act, right? So you realize this is a geometry that there's no precedent for it. And the more you're exposed to all these different things, you are. So that's been very much my paradigm as I move. Then I graduated architecture school, and I call it high times. Everybody was hiring. They were flying you all over the world, all over the US, and again, I decided to stay in Austin because it's so important to be in your community with the people you know and your social capital and your connections and your network. And of course, I met the lady who's now my wife and love of my life, and she decided to go to a PhD. So that's very important too. So So I stayed at HDR, which is a multinational engineering company known for engineering. They have an expertise in healthcare. So right off the bat, working on master plans for hospitals, got to work on Abu Dhabi hospital, Cleveland Clinic, for the graphics program. And then suddenly, when you're in a big firm like that opens a satellite office, it's a tiny office, you start assuming roles, even though there's a bigger infrastructure. And they notice faster what your skills are and what your, so we did higher ed and projects in, So they notice what you can do, and again, stories. Because we moved when I was a kid, I had the fortune of hanging out with my dad's friends who were students. My dad was the old guy, right, in this. And all his friends were in his late 20s, studying also in grad school. And I was a 15, 16-year-old kid. That's where I learned a lot of things. I didn't go to parties with, I learned to party, but with these older kids. But some of these kids became something and somebody. And that's also part of your network. And you got to understand all those connections. Some of those people needed buildings. The recession was slowly starting. Well, I got this doctor who's, oh, you're a kid, you don't. I made the proposal, I made a concept based on, Texas landscape and the Donald Judd. So you gotta be versed in art, very versed in for a cancer center in Dallas. What the hell did I know about laying out a cancer center? No, but that's HDR, right? They have the experts. I'll just design it. So made the renderings, made the presentation, and won the project. Design, build. So that was like, oh, wow. In this business, you got to bring in work. Otherwise, I could be the most talented or the least talented, but like the gentleman before me said, you got to won that project. And we won it. And then the things were starting to slow. And I had this kid who was the only person in how many people does HDR have? 10,000 people? The only person with an industrial design degree from Italy who how would you call that? The mothership in Omaha has relationships with manufacturers, and they felt that as a source of revenue, they wanted to associate themselves with furniture manufacturers. You might have heard of this company, Steelcase, down the street. They're starting to get in the healthcare business, and they're trying to team up with big players in the healthcare industry, so HDR. Yeah, we'll do it, but we don't have any furniture designers. We'll just serve as an expertise. My boss, thank goodness, was visionary enough to say, well, we need to give work to this kid. Send him over to Omaha, to Grand Rapids. That was my first experience with being in Michigan, by the way. So this is the first project, was a nurse station where I was part of the team with Nurture, which is the Steelcase. That led to several collaborations with different manufacturers. So parallelly that I was getting my licensing requirements to become an architect, working on master plans and architecture projects, et cetera, et cetera. Architects are not as lucky as engineers in the sense that you cannot just get out of school and get your PE or license. You have to work 3 to 4 years through an internship program that is rigorously painful. Wonderful. Then you have to take, back when I did it, 9 exams. As I said, I'm not very good at taking tests, so I had to take them 12 times. But I passed them. But that's not the point. The point is that even though math was not my strength because, whatever, I went to public school in Puerto Rico and all that, I passed actually with flying colors. It was actually my best exam. Well, eventually, the word got around, and I became the lead designer for this product division for HDR as a 25, 26-year-old. And David Edwards is a high-end luxury furniture manufacturer in Baltimore. They had this problem for a sleeper sofa in hospitals, and they had been working on this for 5, 6 years, no solution, thousands of dollars in prototypes. So offering a solution for a sofa that you didn't have to sit on the same surface where you sleep, that was customizable, that all this rigorous, so all this idea of, I thought of the camping gear again, and how this non-hardware type of systems without, with just fabric, and that's how we ended up with this solution. So the high times, poof, came to an end. 2008, I was 28, and HDR was really, really wonderful to me, and they closed the Austin office, and they said, we want to keep you, but you'd have to move to the Dallas office. Like one of my hippie neighbors told me, hey, like, you can go there and make a living, man, but you can't have a life in Dallas. True. Well, decided to stay. My wife was in her PhD program at the time, and went through probably 3 or 4 jobs. Got laid off, got fired, the whole spectrum. At the end of the day, you gotta, like we used to say in the mountains in Philma, scramble, be flexible. And if that story is not, put it on hold, start a new story. So I started a new story in this tiny little consulting firm called Sunland Group in Austin. And they focus mostly on construction management, quantity surveying, which is cost estimation. During the recession, everybody wants to cost estimate to value engineer their projects, right? So it was a pretty interesting business, but I am a designer. Oh, I'm a blue blood designer. So I said, no, I'm really not. You have to understand that you gotta make a living, you don't wanna be a starving artist, and I didn't. So we did cost estimations for military bases, data centers for the University of Texas, and then our principal had a specific expertise in airport infrastructure. And things started to change. It was very small, got a lot of experience in project management, quantities and cost and blah, 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 all those things. And I said, why don't we just, we're known for cost estimation, why don't we just start marketing this idea of the full package? We're designing as well, and be vocal about it. And the airport in Austin is growing at an incredible pace, as you may or may not know. This is an old budget rent-a-car facility that needed to become a taxi station for all the taxis waiting. It's a really simple, dinky building. But the airport never had a LEED accredited building. So, I mean, we did everything from spalling to extension joints to bag management, you name it. In that airport, we had a 3-year contract to do whatever odd job there was, and we did them all. But this story was like, well, we need this LEED building. Anybody know what LEED is? Like, well, yeah, I got this kid here who has the LEED accreditation. I've never done a LEED. Well, I had with HDR, but never as a LEED architect. And we got our LEED silver, and we did, and got the Austin life into it. And it's very simple. Like, this is my first relationship with landscape forms, by the way, which it's a story how stories cross over. It's a layering. It's basically a big porch for these taxi drivers to hang out before they go to pick up their passengers. So nobody thought about putting exercise equipment. Nobody thought I had, why, they don't need to exercise. They don't need to play basketball. Well, they do. Otherwise, they start doing bad things. So there's no more vandalism. There's no more bad things occurring at the airport because they have stuff to do. Coach America. Part of the things that you survived during the recession, in this case, was the stimulus plan. And I always talk about this because it kept me employed. We had the chance to win this project in downtown San Antonio. It's literally a block, a full block. It was, I think, 6 to 8 plats, all different levels, completely misaligned. This horrible, stupid-looking building with an amazing view of downtown San Antonio. So, advice professionally is do what you're told first, do it on budget, then you get to have all the fun. Or like I do with my job, whatever my boss tells me, and I always do another one that is what I would do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, so we got the whole project, we laid out the whole plat, we worked collaboratively as a team with civil engineers, and we did a brand new wash facility. And the icing on the cake was the administration building, which is this that horrible building you saw, we turned it into this, which may or may not be horrible, but at least it's new and clean, right? So that's my crash story. Design culture and craft is landscape forms, and that's the reason why I'm here in Kalamazoo. In 2011, and you'll see in my next story, is I've always worked a parallel life. Whether it is hanging out with friends, because life happens parallelly, right? And you sometimes cross. You have to make an effort to cross over to different lives, different. I was invited to give a lecture in the Museum of Austin in Texas about emerging architecture. But all I had was the infrastructure projects. So not as fancy as these boutique architecture, fancy projects that you see a lot. No. Well, okay, well, I always figured it was easier to get money from somebody at a smaller dose than getting $1 million for a fancy house. So I've always been making prototypes and furniture on the side since I had my, I've always been making stuff, collaborating with sculptors, with metal workers, because they're buddies and because we like hanging out, playing music or jamming. This project is what brought me to Kalamazoo in many ways. You know, obviously, hopefully, my whole story is more than just the sum of the parts, right? But I've been toying around with concrete. I grew up making concrete in Puerto Rico. That's what we did, and you know, everybody from Latin America here knows that we make concrete buildings. But you know, we have the story of this idea of how to make a floating slab and integrate it with steel elegantly. Key on that. Usually you hide all these things in the structure of a building. So there's a very architectural aspect to this, yet it's still at the scale of a furniture project. I also had a relationship with the manufacturer that contacted me after. I used to make prototypes, immediately publish them because I have no money for patents. And then it's like throwing usually I would get hired for my capability of producing ideas rather than the work. So I've always been very open about giving away ideas because I feel at this point now confident enough that I will be able to produce more, hopefully. Otherwise, I will not be able to exist. So Landscape Forms hired me and recruited me to move to Kalamazoo from Austin. And we are, if you're not familiar with Landscape Forms, we do a lot of the site furniture around this area. I see a little table out there. We're the premier outdoor furniture manufacturer in the U.S. We'd like to think the world, but we're working on that right now. We team up with world-class architects, designers, to do this really high-profile design. We team up with them. So in this case, the company had never worked on a concrete project before, and we bought this company, Meld, out of North Carolina, and developed upfront, put all the investment costs in development for ultra-high performance concrete. I don't want to talk about technicalities of concrete here because you probably guys know more about it. But from 6,000 pounds per square inch, we can get it to 20,000 with some flex in it. It's quite amazing what we've been able to achieve with that technology. Was also lucky enough to start working with Chipman, which is related to the family in so many ways, but over the years, any project that he touches becomes gold, and this chair is no exception, pushing the boundaries of what casting aluminum could be. And this chair is fully casted in aluminum and very low tech, but it's incredibly, there's nothing straight about this. It's the closest thing to a Ferrari we have in terms of curvatures and surface and complexity. There's nothing rational about it. On the other hand, you got this ultra high rationalist architect out of Dallas, Lionel Morrison. And with him, we created this collection. Wood, very, very flexible. Since we moved to Kalamazoo, we have a very small team, the two gentlemen that came earlier. The three of us are in task to take the company to the next level. The company has a history of 45 years catering to landscape architects, but it's a very small niche. We're trying to reach further and farther in the world. So we started by rebranding the company, the website, etc. we have several strategies to grow the market. One of them are the first two projects you saw, which is smaller, higher niche projects. Our traditional project is heavy, bomb-proof, vandalize-proof. So that's two. Third one is reaching further markets with we call it the global collections. It's about establishing partnerships with people all over the world to develop product that can be dismounted, lighter weight. So this is our first collection for that with an international language. It's also very keen on observing people's behavior and distilling design to a level of essence. And I talked about earlier about a parallel life. Throughout all this, and what's my pastime? Well, go out, hang out with friends, and come up with new ideas. Play music, hang out. I've been doing 10, 15 competitions a year with friends, with engineers, with marketing experts or business people, with everything from pavilions to furniture to, that's basically what I do. And on the side, I also would make, that's a penthouse we finished in Grand Rapids last year with scrap wood from the landscape forms facility. But these are the highlights of those years. And this project also got a interest from landscape forms because it's about the big picture, right? Architects, we get into these arguments about details with engineers. No, we don't do the same thing. I am trained to think about this big picture and this orchestrate. A designer within that spectrum is a violin player, a virtuoso. You can have a virtuoso. But an architect is more like an orchestra director, who may or may not be the most talented musician, perhaps, right? An engineer is part of that team. Different engineer, different task, the project manager. So an orchestra, at least that's the way I see it, obviously. We can have a polite discussion about it. But again, going back to our childhood of student housing in Athens, Greece, we came up with a very strong concept of very prefabricated treehouse for these very, very narrow lots in downtown Athens. But it's also about the full experience of living cooperatively. And this is where you develop a lot of the habits that you will have for the rest of your life in college. Your work ethic, if you didn't have them before, you're going to develop a lot of good or bad habits. So that's pretty much our premise of living cooperative and understanding the time of the year. And so that we didn't win the competition, but that's fine. We have a great project to show you. This one, on the other hand, is about Detroit. I have this, one of my best friends, we were going to take over the world, but he fell in love with a Croatian girl, so he lives in Croatia. But to this day, we collaborate, and we talk pretty much 3 or 4 times a week. And we did this project in downtown Detroit 2 years ago. And we won second prize in international competition, just two cats drawing. But it's about communicating the idea of collaboration and interrelationship between business community and how, in order to innovate, you need to cross and be a bridge crosser and reach out to the other side. So that's our proposal. We did this one for January of this year. The Aga Khan Foundation in Afghanistan had this proposal for the Bamiyan. Again, we proposed a building embedded into the landscape because of my new background in landscape architecture, which I didn't have before. I'm really interested in social, bringing people together. That's what our furniture does. That's what our buildings do. So, in summary, I think that's the best way to enable everybody to contribute to a story or to have the story and to just enrich it. La pureza está en la mezcla. The purity is in the mixture. So the more points of view you have, the more likely you hit the target. Isn't that triangulation, right? So the story is not in. I'm only 35. Hopefully I have a few more years in me. But that's what I have for you guys.
Questions? Or maybe a comment. Maybe there's a good lesson behind something he said.
it's it or nothing. If you don't have communication, if you don't have a good team, you're going to have a really shitty project. Sorry, it's not going to work out. It's success is in being able to trust who you work with, and part of trusting somebody is understanding where they're from and where they're coming from, what point of view they have. There's a lot of misunderstanding. Even with the people I work with 20 plus engineers. Each of them speaks a completely different language. I need to understand, so team dynamics are, and also understand your role. We call, in the design world, you call it a T designer. Have a very broad background with a very specific specialization of what you're strong at. So it's really important that you're able to articulate what is your strength, what are your weaknesses, because that's knowing your weaknesses is just as important. Like going that team. I really love that diagram you have, putting Juanita and Maria and everybody doing the best. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing a master's in engineering with a concentration in structural design. And it blows my mind when I see all those crazy designs that you do, which are great. I like them a lot. But has it been really hard to work with structural engineers when you're trying to get something the shape you want?
Well, that's why you come to the table ready to give and to be flexible, scramble, be flexible. You cannot, you all know Charles and Raines, the famous couple designers. They designed a lot of things for Herman Miller. They're so am I. But they asked him, do you ever compromise on your design? He's like, never, but I accept constraints willingly. So again, I don't go into a design thinking it's going to be this way or this way. To me, and with landscape forms, it's the same thing. I work with 10, 15 different projects at the same time with 10 different designers, different personalities. You have to be, the story is so important. If you don't have a strong design concept and a strong direction of where you want to, I want to design camping gear. That was just a direction. I didn't end up there, but at the same time, you have to allow things to happen. You have to allow accidents. And I've over time, happy accident. My life is a series of happy accidents. I never thought I would be in Kalamazoo. God dang it. But I'm here. You got to let it happen to you. And the best engineers that I've worked with are the ones that are, let's take a chance. I don't know the outcome, but they're taking risks. I deal in the impossible. My job as an architect is to communicate what could be, what will be. I love the word design is not necessarily the best word, and this is something I learned in Italy. It was, though Italians cheat and they say the word design in English, the true word is progettare, which in Spanish is proyectar, no? Right? But design comes from disegno, which means to draw. No, it has not, drawing is just one little part. To project is the future, right? And then filling the gaps in between. And that's not necessarily a straight line. Engineering has a task of filling in some parts. But the end goal, somebody needs to establish it and negotiate it. And if it changes, you got to be flexible about it. Does that work? Or it's part of the dialogue. You're going to butt heads. But it's not personal. It's part of the dialogue, and it's part of the experience. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But you get a lot of architects we have a reputation of being, I don't know, not very nice sometimes. But it depends. It's not a democracy, but it's also not a dictatorship. It's not designed by committee either. You gotta trust, but that trust needs to be built. I don't know if that works, but probably not the right answer for you, but it's my answer.
Other questions?
So, what happened to your hippie friend that told you not to move to Dallas?
Oh, yeah.
They're not friends anymore.
No, Todd is a great neighbor. He still lives in my building. I bought a little one-bedroom condo in downtown Austin 15 years ago, and nobody was living in that. So hopefully I can retire there, or I don't know, go there on the winters. Those winters here are kicking my ass. Or, you know, we'll see what. Yes.
I think Subway or
Yes.
Subway no. Architecture is hard.
The what?
Architecture is hard.
Mm-hmm.
in the tour.
That's a very broad question, but yes, there is an American language and there's a European language in terms of form. As I said earlier, when I went to Europe, I never realized how American I am. And I've been very deliberate in manifesting that I am not a European, even though I'm Europeanly trained. I don't want to be European. I want to be, and we're young nations. We're still evolving that. So, to answer, you know, yes, they have a great culture of art and design and architecture. In my personal life, is about taking our experiences from here and developing something new. That's what but the other thing is the why before the what. Why you do something or what you're doing. That's why something I love about Landscape Forms is why we do it. We're a design-led company, which is very unlikely in the US. Most companies in the US are manufacturing-led, engineering-led, CFO-led. We're design. Our strategy comes first, and the reason why we're doing it. So there's a fair few companies like that in the US, but I believe that the time for design is rising. If you keep up with the Stanford D School and a lot of these new trends that are from an academic point of view has become more articulated in the recent years. What I was taught as a design in my undergrad as a design theory, now it's design thinking, and so it's being articulated better now with an American essence. That I think it's more understandable by people in the U.S. We're not there yet, but you have to be an optimist, like Joaquin said. You gotta, or you said it. Well, you both said it. They were both great. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.